still unmarried Audrey. Bradley sneered, swirling his champagne, while his new heiress fiancée giggled. Time is ticking. Nobody wants a leftover. He thought he had won. He had no idea the terrifyingly wealthy, dangerously ancient billionaire stepping out of the shadows wasn't just a VIP, he was her husband. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured rainbows across the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, illuminating the elite of Manhattan society. Audrey Kensington stood near a towering ice sculpture, nursing a glass of sparkling water. She wore a simple, yet impossibly elegant, black velvet gown that hugged her curves, her dark hair swept up in a flawless chignon. She looked serene, a picture of quiet grace amidst the chaotic networking of the annual Sterling Forbes charity gala. However, the peace was inevitably shattered by a familiar, grating voice. Bradley Weston, her ex-boyfriend of 5 years, materialized from the crowd. He was dressed in a flashy, custom-tailored tuxedo that screamed new money. Hanging off his arm was Chloe, a 22-year-old socialite, whose family wealth had recently funded Bradley's aggressive tech startup. Bradley had dumped Audrey via a 2-minute phone call 6 months ago, right after she had spent years helping him build his company from a dusty garage into a Silicon Valley contender. Audrey. Bradley said, his tone dripping with a mixture of pity and condescension. I didn't expect to see you here. Did you manage to score a +1 from someone in middle management? Audrey didn't flinch. She took a slow sip of her water. I received an invitation. Bradley. Just like everyone else. Chloe giggled, leaning into Bradley's shoulder, flashing a diamond engagement ring that was offensively large and entirely lacking in taste. Oh, Brad, is this the ex you told me about? The one who works in, what was it? Antique restoration. Something like that. Bradley chuckled, adjusting his cuffs. He leaned in closer to Audrey, the smell of his expensive, overpowering cologne making her want to take a step back. You know, Audrey, you really should start putting yourself out there. It's been half a year. Still unmarried. Still single time is ticking. Nobody wants a leftover in this city. You're not getting any younger, and frankly, standing alone in a corner at a gala like this is just sad. Audrey offered a polite, hollow smile, keeping her gaze steady. If only Bradley knew the terrifying, magnificent truth. If only he knew that the quiet antique restorer he had discarded was now bound by blood and law to a man whose wealth and power eclipsed the entire Forbes top 10 combined. 6 months ago, devastated and caught in a torrential downpour after Bradley's cruel dismissal, Audrey had sought refuge in an exclusive appointment-only antiquities gallery on the Upper East Side. That was where she met Alistair Rothschild. He was a man of paradoxes, impossibly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features, eyes the color of stormy oceans, and a presence that seemed to consume all the oxygen in the room. He had offered her a towel, a cup of rare imported tea, and a conversation that lasted until dawn. It didn't take long for Audrey to realize Alistair was not a normal man. His skin was always cold to the touch. He moved with a predatory, silent grace, and he had a first-hand knowledge of the Renaissance that no historian could possess. When he finally revealed his true nature to her, the immortal king of a hidden aristocratic vampire society that covertly controlled global finance and politics, Audrey hadn't run. Instead, she found herself hopelessly drawn to the fierce, protective devotion he offered. They were married in a secret blood-binding ceremony in a sprawling Gothic estate in upstate New York just 2 months later. She wasn't just married, she was a queen. But Alistair had insisted on keeping their union out of the human press to protect her from rival supernatural factions, while he consolidated his power in the city. Tonight, however, was supposed to be their first public debut. I appreciate your concern, Bradley, Audrey said smoothly, her voice a calm melody compared to his brassy arrogance. But I assure you, my personal life is thriving. Bradley snorted, taking a gulp of his champagne. Right, thriving. Is your imaginary boyfriend in the bathroom, or did you just come here for the free caviar? Before Audrey could formulate a response, the temperature in the grand ballroom plummeted. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was a sudden, bone-chilling frost that caused the breath of several guests to mist in the air. The lively chatter of the gala died down instantly, replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. The heavy mahogany double doors at the entrance of the ballroom were thrust open by two nervous-looking event coordinators. Every head turned. Alistair Rothschild stood in the doorway. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that fit his broad, imposing frame perfectly. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his pale, flawless face held an expression of terrifying authority. He emanated an aura of absolute dominance, a primal energy that made the human guests instinctively step back, parting like the Red Sea, as he began to walk into the room. Whispers broke out like wildfire among the elite attendees. "Is that Rothschild? I heard he never attends these things. He practically owns the Federal Reserve. What is he doing here?" Bradley's eyes widened completely, abandoning his mockery of Audrey. His ambition immediately overrode his arrogance. "Holy hell," Bradley muttered, his voice trembling with eager desperation. "That's Alistair Rothschild, CEO of Vanguard Holdings. I've been trying to get a pitch meeting with his acquisitions team for 3 months. If he backs my company, we go global by next quarter." Audrey watched silently as Alistair's piercing gaze swept across the room. The moment his eyes found hers, the terrifying coldness in them melted into a flash of possessive warmth. He began walking straight toward their corner, his footsteps making no sound on the marble floor. "Watch and learn, Audrey," Bradley hissed hastily, straightening his tie and pushing Chloe slightly behind him. "This is how a real winner networks. Maybe I'll put in a good word for you to get a job in his mailroom." Silence rippled outward from Alistair as he crossed the ballroom, the high society crowd shrinking back from the invisible weight of his presence. He didn't look at the billionaires, politicians, or celebrities who desperately tried to catch his eye. His focus was locked entirely on Audrey, though Bradley, blinded by his own towering ego, assumed the billionaire was approaching him. As Alistair drew within 5 feet, Bradley aggressively stepped forward, blocking Audrey from view. He thrust his hand out, pasting on a charismatic, sycophantic smile. "Mr. Rothschild." Bradley boomed his voice, shattering the quiet tension in their corner. "Bradley Weston, CEO of Western Tech. It is an absolute honor. I've been following Vanguard Holdings' aggressive expansion in the European tech sector, and I firmly believe our new algorithmic platform could revolutionize your data integration." Alistair stopped. He did not look at Bradley's extended hand. He slowly tilted his head, his storm-grey eyes locking onto Bradley's face with the detached curiosity of a predator observing an insect. The silence stretched, becoming agonizingly thick. Bradley's smile began to falter. His outstretched hand, twitching as the icy atmosphere of the room seemed to concentrate entirely around them. "Weston," Alistair said softly. His voice was a rich, dark, velvet baritone that commanded absolute obedience. It wasn't loud, but it carried effortlessly. "I am familiar with your company." Bradley's chest puffed out, relief flooding his features. "Excellent. Then you know we are on the verge of a massive breakthrough. Actually, I'd love to introduce you to my fiancée, Chloe Harrington, of the Harrington real estate family." Chloe offered a nervous wave. Bradley then gestured dismissively over his shoulder toward Audrey. "And this is just an old acquaintance of mine, Audrey. She's nobody to worry about, just hovering." Alistair's eyes shifted. For a fraction of a second, the storm-grey irises flared with a terrifying luminescent crimson. Only Audrey and Bradley were close enough to see it. Bradley blinked, stumbling back half a step, a sudden primal panic gripping his chest. He suddenly felt like he was standing in front of a hungry wolf completely unarmed. An old acquaintance. Alistair repeated the danger in his voice, escalating. He stepped neatly around Bradley, ignoring the tech CEO entirely, and stopped directly in front of Audrey. The terrifying cold aura surrounding the billionaire instantly dissolved, replaced by a gentle, overwhelming warmth. Alistair reached out, taking Audrey's hand in his. He brought her knuckles to his lips, pressing a soft, reverent kiss against her skin. "My apologies for my tardiness. My love." Alistair murmured, his voice loud enough for Bradley, Chloe, and the eavesdropping socialites to hear clearly. The board meeting in Geneva ran longer than anticipated. I hope you haven't been terribly bored without me. Audrey smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up her face. She stepped into his side, and Alistair instantly wrapped a protective, possessive arm around her waist. "I was managing," she replied softly, "though I did have to endure some rather tedious conversation." Bradley looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His jaw hung slack, his face draining of all colour. He looked from Audrey's calm face to Alistair's imposing figure, his brain failing to process the reality unfolding in front of him. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Your love," Bradley stammered, his voice cracking. "Mr. Rothschild, there must be some mistake. This is Audrey Kensington. She's just an antique restorer." Alistair turned his gaze back to Bradley, and the warmth vanished. The icy, immortal king returned. "She is Audrey Rothschild," Alistair corrected, his tone lethal. "My wife, and the co-chair of Vanguard Holdings." The whispers in the ballroom erupted into a frenzy. "Wife Rothschild is married. Did he say Audrey Rothschild?" Bradley's knees buckled slightly. The glass of champagne slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The noise was deafening in the tense atmosphere. "Wife." He whispered the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at Audrey, really looked at her, seeing the quiet confidence, the flawless velvet gown, the subtle, breathtaking diamond necklace that he had previously assumed was costume jewelry. It was suddenly very clear that it was worth more than his entire company. "Now," Alistair continued, his eyes narrowing into deadly slits, "you mentioned Western Tech, a fascinating little startup, heavily reliant on its primary investor, a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands, correct?" Bradley nodded dumbly, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the freezing air. Yes. Apex Investments." Alistair smiled, but it was a cruel, razor-sharp expression that showed entirely too many teeth. "Apex Investments is a subsidiary of Vanguard Holdings, which means, Mr. Weston, I own 90% of your debt. And after hearing you refer to my queen as a leftover..." Alistair paused, letting the word hang in the air like a death sentence. "I believe I will be calling in that debt. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp." Bradley let out a pathetic sound, somewhere between a choke and a sob. Calling in the debt immediately would bankrupt him. It would wipe out everything he had built, everything he had stolen Audrey's time to create. Chloe, realizing she was suddenly tethered to a sinking ship, took a massive step away from Bradley, looking horrified. "You can't do that," Bradley pleaded, his arrogant facade completely shattered. He was begging now. "Please, it was a joke, just a misunderstanding. Audrey, tell him, we used to be a team." Audrey looked at the man who had cruelly discarded her, who had mocked her publicly just minutes ago. She felt no pity, only a profound sense of closure. She leaned her head against Alistair's solid chest. "I think," Audrey said quietly, her voice echoing perfectly in the silent room, "that your time is ticking, Bradley. Nobody wants a bankrupt CEO in this city. Silence absolute and heavy blanketed the Waldorf Astoria ballroom. The elite of Manhattan hedge fund managers, real estate tycoons, and old money heiresses stood completely frozen, their champagne flutes suspended in midair. Bradley Weston's face had drained of all color, matching the pristine white table linens scattered throughout the room. He looked less like a tech prodigy and more like a terrified child who had just accidentally shattered a priceless artifact. Two broad-shouldered security guards, their earpieces discreetly buzzing, materialized from the shadows of the grand arches. They didn't belong to the hotel. They wore the subtle, obsidian black lapel pins of Vanguard Holdings' private security detail. At a nearly imperceptible nod from Alistair Rothschild, the guards flanked Bradley, gripping his custom-tailored jacket with unyielding force. "Mr. Rothschild, wait, please, we can negotiate this. I can offer you equity." Bradley's voice cracked, elevating to a desperate, shrill pitch as he was physically lifted off his polished Salvatore Ferragamo loafers. His frantic pleas echoed against the gilded ceiling, but Alistair had already turned his back, entirely dismissing the ruined man's existence. Chloe Harrington, terrified of the social collateral damage, had practically sprinted toward the powder room, leaving her disgraced fiancé to be dragged backward through the heavy mahogany doors. Audrey watched the doors swing shut, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. A wave of murmurs instantly resurrected in the room. The power dynamics of New York's high society had just violently shifted in a matter of seconds. Every gaze was locked onto Audrey, calculating her new worth. Women who had ignored her existence for the past hour were now desperately trying to catch her eye, their minds buzzing with the implications of the Rothschild empire possessing a queen. Alistair's hand rested on the small of her back, his thumb tracing a slow, comforting circle against the black velvet of her gown. His skin, though cool, radiated a magnetic anchoring energy that grounded her amidst the overwhelming sensory overload of the gala. "Are you all right, my love?" he murmured, his storm-grey eyes searching her face with startling tenderness. "I can clear this room in 60 seconds if their staring becomes tedious." "I'm perfectly fine," Audrey replied, a genuine confident smile touching her lips. "Though I suspect getting a table at Le Bernardin just became remarkably easier." Alistair chuckled, a rich, dark sound that vibrated against her side. However, the momentary levity was fractured by the approach of a tall, elegantly dressed man holding a crystal glass of bourbon. He moved with a predatory stillness that Audrey instantly recognized. He was one of them, an immortal. "Alistair, darling," the man drawled, his British accent thick with aristocratic mockery. "I must admit, when I heard the rumors that the ruthless king of the Northern Coven had taken a human bride, I assumed it was a pathetic joke. Yet here she stands, draped in diamonds and masquerading as a titan of industry." Alistair's posture shifted imperceptibly, hardening into a stance of absolute lethality. The air pressure in their immediate vicinity plummeted, dropping the temperature so drastically that frost began to form on the base of the nearby ice sculpture. "Sebastian Montgomery." Alistair said, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with a supernatural authority that forced several nearby humans to instinctively clutch their chests in panic. "I suggest you choose your next words with the utmost precision. My patience for your insolence expired a century ago." Sebastian Montgomery was a known entity in the modern financial world, operating as a senior partner at a notoriously aggressive private equity firm, heavily tied to European banking syndicates. In the hidden world, however, he was a centuries-old rival who had relentlessly challenged Alistair's monopoly over the eastern seaboard. He had pale blonde hair, calculating green eyes, and a cruel smirk that never quite reached his gaze. Sebastian stepped closer, completely ignoring the terrifying aura Alistair was projecting. He locked his gaze on Audrey, his eyes dropping to the delicate pulse point at the base of her throat. It was a blatant, highly insulting display of supernatural disrespect. "Audrey, isn't it?" Sebastian purred, taking a deliberate sip of his bourbon. "Fascinating. Tell me, does she know how our world operates, Alistair? Does she understand that binding yourself to a fragile mortal creature is considered an unforgivable weakness in the eyes of the High Council, a liability that your enemies will inevitably exploit?" Audrey didn't shrink back. The timid, heartbroken girl who had wept over Bradley Weston's betrayal 6 months ago was dead, replaced by a woman fortified by the ancient, potent blood bond she shared with the most powerful creature in North America. She could feel Alistair's rage boiling through the ethereal tether that connected their minds, a violent crimson tide threatening to snap. Before Alistair could physically tear Sebastian apart in front of 300 horrified witnesses, Audrey stepped forward. "Mr. Montgomery shall do that," Audrey said smoothly, her voice carrying a chilling, authoritative resonance that surprised even herself. "I am well aware of how your world operates. I am also aware that your firm, Montgomery Capital, recently over-leveraged itself in a desperate bid to acquire a controlling stake in the lithium mines in South America." Sebastian's arrogant smirk faltered his green eyes, narrowing in sudden suspicion. Audrey held his gaze, her expression perfectly composed, a mirror of her husband's terrifying stoicism. "It would be a terrible shame," she continued, her voice laced with lethal politeness, "if Vanguard Holdings decided to flood the market with our own lithium reserves tomorrow morning. Your share prices would plummet by 70% before the opening bell. You wouldn't just lose your seat on the High Council, Sebastian. You would be begging us for a loan to keep your Manhattan penthouse." The silence between the three of them was deafening. Sebastian's jaw tightened so fiercely that the sound of his ancient teeth grinding was audible over the ambient string quartet playing in the background. He had expected a frightened, oblivious human plaything. Instead, he had walked directly into the jaws of a predator who possessed both financial and supernatural backing. Sebastian Montgomery stood entirely motionless, the crystal bourbon glass in his hand, groaning under the sudden immense pressure of his grip. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the sophisticated Wall Street executive slipped, revealing the feral ancient monster beneath. His eyes flashed a venomous glowing yellow, and his upper lip twitched, betraying the instinctive urge to bare his fangs. Alistair moved with a speed that the human eye could not register. One moment he was standing beside Audrey, and the next his hand was clamped around Sebastian's throat. Alistair hadn't lifted him, but the sheer agonizing force of the grip forced Sebastian to drop his glass. It shattered against the marble amber liquid, splashing across their polished shoes. "My wife," Alistair whispered, his voice a horrifying demonic rasp that belonged to a creature of nightmares, "just gave you a masterclass in modern warfare, Sebastian. In the past, I would have simply severed your head from your shoulders for daring to look at her pulse. But Audrey is far more elegant in her brutality. She prefers to dismantle you piece by piece, starting with your pride and ending with your portfolio." Several human guests nearby gasped, taking hasty steps backward, completely oblivious to the supernatural reality, but inherently terrified by the raw, murderous intent rolling off Alistair in waves. "Let him go, Alistair," Audrey said softly, placing a gentle hand on her husband's tensed forearm. "He isn't worth the dry cleaning bill for your tuxedo. Besides, I want him to be awake to watch his empire crumble on the Bloomberg terminal tomorrow." Alistair's crimson eyes snapped to Audrey's face. The blinding rage in his expression immediately softened at her touch. He released Sebastian with a disgusted shove, wiping his leather-gloved hand on a silk handkerchief he pulled from his breast pocket. Sebastian stumbled backward, violently rubbing his throat. He looked at Audrey, raw terror, finally replacing his aristocratic arrogance. He realized with crushing certainty that she was not a weakness. She was a weapon. Without a single word, Sebastian turned and pushed his way through the crowd, practically fleeing the ballroom. "Remind me," Alistair murmured, wrapping his arm securely around Audrey's waist and pulling her flush against his side, "to buy you something obscenely expensive tomorrow. Watching you mentally castrate a 500-year-old vampire was the most intoxicating thing I have ever witnessed." Audrey laughed, a bright, clear sound that completely shattered the residual tension in the air. "I'll hold you to that. Cartier has a vintage emerald necklace I've been eyeing." "Done," Alistair replied instantly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Now I believe we have thoroughly exhausted the entertainment value of this gala. Shall we depart, my queen?" "Let's go home," she agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. As they walked toward the grand exit, the sea of high society elites parted for them with newfound terrified reverence. Mayors, senators, and billionaires bowed their heads as Alistair and Audrey passed. They stepped out of the stifling heat of the Waldorf Astoria and into the crisp, biting air of the New York night. A sleek, armored Maybach was already idling at the curb, its doors held open by a loyal, immortal driver. Just as Audrey was about to step into the luxurious vehicle, a pathetic, shivering figure detached itself from the shadows of a nearby street lamp. It was Bradley Weston. His tuxedo jacket was rumpled, his tie was undone, and he looked as though he had aged 10 years in the span of an hour. Chloe was nowhere to be seen, having clearly abandoned the sinking ship the moment the financial execution had been pronounced. "Audrey!" Bradley croaked, his voice raw. He took a hesitant step forward, stopping immediately when the driver bared a set of very sharp, very unnatural teeth in a silent warning. Bradley fell to his knees on the cold concrete, clasping his hands together in a gesture of absolute defeat. "Audrey, I'm begging you. We spent 5 years together. I built that company from nothing. You know how hard I worked. You can't just let him take it all away. Please, I was stupid. I was blind." Audrey paused, her hand resting on the doorframe of the Maybach. She looked down at the man who had discarded her like trash, the man who had openly mocked her independence and her worth just an hour prior. She felt no anger anymore, only a profound, heavy pity. "You didn't build that company from nothing. Bradley," Audrey said, her voice echoing coldly in the quiet street. "We built it. I proofread your contracts I fed you when you were too stressed to leave the garage. I sacrificed my own career to ensure yours flourished. And the moment you got a taste of real money, you threw me away because I wasn't shiny enough for your new world." Bradley sobbed, a pathetic, broken sound that offered no redemption. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Your apology is utterly worthless," Alistair interjected, smoothly stepping into the streetlight. "Your company belongs to Vanguard Holdings now. Your assets will be liquidated by noon. I suggest you get comfortable with the concept of public transportation, Mr. Weston." Alistair guided Audrey into the plush leather interior of the Maybach, sliding in right beside her. The heavy door slammed shut, with a definitive thud sealing them in their own private, luxurious sanctuary. As the car pulled away from the curb, merging into the glowing arteries of Manhattan traffic, Audrey didn't look back. She leaned into her husband's embrace, feeling the cold, powerful rhythm of his immortal heart against her cheek. She was no longer a leftover. She was the queen of the night, and her reign had only just begun. Audrey's transformation from a discarded ex to the undisputed queen of the immortal underworld is the ultimate revenge story. Bradley completely ruined his own life, and Sebastian learned a harsh lesson about underestimating a powerful woman. If you enjoyed this dramatic, twist-filled vampire romance, please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more. Ring the bell to stay updated, and drop a comment letting us know what you thought of Audrey's brilliant financial takedown.